everyone. We really appreciate your time and interest for this. For today's session, we're going to go through about a 15-20 minute presentation. You're very welcome to write questions in the Q&A box below. And Alex, who I'll introduce you in a second, will answer any questions throughout. But if there's any extra ones or trickier ones, then we can talk about them afterwards, certainly. So let's introduce myself and Alex now. So I'm Carrie Newbold. I'm the CANNect's Director of Clinical Operations. So basically my background is in medical research, and within CANNect I work with the doctors as well as the pharmacists for education as well as the general clinical operations. Alex Berrells, he is our CANNect specialist. Alex, did you want to say hello and introduce yourself briefly too?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Alex. I primarily work with CANNect Group on the CANNect platform, and helping our users manage the platform. So if you have any questions about that, you're more than welcome to direct them to me. I'm a marketing and science graduate from Monash with a major in marketing and a major in psychology. I think that's about it for me.
Perfect, lovely. Oh, well, let's play. Okay, so medical legalisation of cannabis. So it started in Australia around the 2016 mark. This is a map that I downloaded end of last year, and I think it was out of date the moment I downloaded it. It is changing, the landscape is changing every moment, which is wonderful and interesting for prospective patients, but it's certainly difficult for us because we kind of need to be able to keep track of the changes to ensure that we're doing the right things. So what it also then provides is legalization, of course, means we have accessibility. And so then within that, our medical training needs to be able to catch up to that availability. We've got more research being created. So previously when there was no, when it was illegal, it was also illegal to do research on it. So what we now have a situation where both the accessibility and the research is opened up at the same time. So there's certainly the research is doing catch up, but it's catching up pretty quick. So there's a lot of work coming out every day within medicinal cannabis. But there is a great amount of public pull. So we've got a lot of general acceptance for medicinal cannabis, and indeed that's growing over time. So no doubt you guys are being asked by your patients about the potential of use for medicinal cannabis. And as I've alluded to before, the regulatory requirements is complex and it's changing. So it is vital that we stay on the lookout for what's going on. And of course that means, of course, we're creating a whole pile of questions. So how are we prescribing it? How are we going to get the permits? What kind of treatment plan? You know, it's quite a lot of information, new information is needing to be created all at once. So we will today, just in the first instance, talk about when is cannabinoids, wonderful, and medicinal cannabis in general indicated. What kind of evidence is supporting this use, and how do we even go about it? Like, what is that prescribing process? So first, let's talk. No doubt, yes, sure, we're not going to have a test on the end of this. It's certainly a complex situation. As much as possible, I'm going to try and clean it up a little bit. So let's start with the endocannabinoid system. So this is a system that for lots of us didn't exist. We didn't know it existed when we first went through our training. So around, it's almost hit the 40, 50-year mark now, I think, that they've uncovered what the base components of THC, of cannabis is. And then through that, they were able to look at what where this was affecting, and this is of course what they've now termed the endocannabinoid system. So they call this a retrograde neurotransmission system, and in the next slide I'll kind of go over what that means. But in general, we're talking about something that is within the CNS and PNS of all animals, short of insects, and has a far-reaching effect. It alters a vast number of bodily systems. So immune system, cardiovascular, liver, gastrointestinal, it's quite across the board. In general, we talk about it being a relax, eat, sleep, forget, protect. This is the kind of main roles. So it's regulating motor functions, cognition, emotional responses, homeostasis, motivation. You're kind of getting the picture. It's a lot of things. So if we're now breaking it down into our three components, we've got our cannabinoids. So these are the ones that are naturally producing. This is what our body makes, the molecules. So EAE, 2AG, there's quite a few now that they're starting to uncover. They then are created and attached to our receptors. So these are what's termed our CB1 receptor, our CB2 receptor, and again, we're finding out more over time too. And then we have our enzymes that will degrade the original endocannabinoids. So this is a system that will sort of all-encompassing. So it will be made, used, and then degraded within that game. What we are talking about with medicinal cannabis is the use of what they term as phytocannabinoids. So this is, unsurprisingly, cannabinoids from plants. And these guys are now directly playing with our CB1 and CB2 receptors. So if we kind of go now what's happening with our CB1 receptor, we have a neuron and our terminals. An action potential will come down the said synapse, go across the cleft, the neurotransmitter will travel across the cleft. That will then trigger the ECB production, so the endocannabinoid production. So before that, it didn't exist, and only once the neurotransmitter has gone across it, they'll go, okay, now we'll make some. That will then go backwards across the cleft. So this is where they're talking about this retrograde neurotransmission, so going backwards. And from there, they will regulate the neurotransmitter. So that it's effectively a stop button, a feedback loop that will support how much neurotransmitter can go across the cleft. The CB2 receptor is slightly different. So now we're talking about something that's found in all organs and structures associated with your immune response. So microglia in cells in brain, neutrophils, mast cells, macrophages, monocytes, lymphocytes. It's if a tissue or an organ is involved in the immune response, then there will be CB2 receptors there. The CB2 receptor is a little bit less understood than the CB1 receptor. In general, we know that it will modulate the cytokine release, which then is how it is manifesting as this immunosuppressant, reduced inflammation, reduced pain. Okay, so let's now talk about phytocannabinoids. So there's quite a lot going on, obviously, with medicinal cannabis in general. So on top of just what's inside the plant, there's a whole pile of variables that will affect what kind of result, what kind of material effectively is grown inside. So I'm not going to cover all of this, but I will cover effectively what's inside the important chemicals inside the plant. So in the first instance, we're talking about terpenes or terpenoids. So this is in lots of plants, and this is associated with the aroma, the smell. And then we have our flavonoids, which is associated with the color. Again, there'll be these kinds of components in lots of plants. And then what's mostly particular to medicinal cannabis and this kind of plant, we have cannabinoids. So these are the ones that originally we thought were the only ones that were binding to our ECB receptors. They've now, in the last few months, have now discovered that some of the terpenes will actually also bind, which highlights this idea of what they term as an entourage effect, where the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Is that right, or the opposite? But effectively, this idea that yes, the cannabinoids are useful by themselves, but possibly the whole plant may give us benefit too. Okay, so then if we're just talking about cannabinoids, the ones that you'll have probably heard of already is the THC and the CBD, the cannabidiol. these are not the only ones. There are certainly plenty of other ones. In fact, I think now they're talking about around the 104 mark. But the majority, not only the most common within the plant is the THC and CBD, but also they're the ones that are most studied and most known about. So this is effectively the rest of the talk. We're only going to be talking about those two cannabinoids. So THC, this is our psychoactive cannabinoid. So this is the one when people are talking about being bent or being high, this is the THC component that they're using. And so it certainly has this euphoria, drowsiness, paranoia style feeling. But then on top of that, we've got relaxant, analgesic, antiemetic, appetite stimulant. So there's the medicinal component that is happening within THC or by THC too. And then for CBD, CBD is our non-psychoactive element. So this is anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anxiolytic. What it also does is it modulates the psychoactive component of THC. So there's a bit of a relationship there too. But it doesn't do everything. So I think with the way medicinal cannabis has become available, the fact that it was illicitly available for so long, and there's so much conversation in the general public about it, there's a lot of anecdotes, a lot of my friend's uncle's dog, almost literally, stories. So what is really important is, yes, we can listen to those kinds of things, but we also need to be able to listen to where the reality fits in. So if we're talking about what kind of indications, so what kind of diagnoses that might be relevant for medicinal cannabis usage, the TGA is a really important stepping stone or a starting point for probably your personal research in this on this topic. So they have created some guidance documents. So one, there's an overview one, which is probably a sensible starting point. And then they've also created another 5 indication-specific documents. So this is the chronic non-cancer pain, palliative care, nausea and vomiting, multiple sclerosis, and refractory epilepsy. So these are not the only indications that medicinal cannabis is used for. These are just the 5 that from 2016-17, these are the ones that were mostly best understood in the use of. In general, what we're interested in for prescribing is patients and situations that hasn't previously responded to the standard medications available for that problem, or that the patient doesn't tolerate those medications. There's also, in the case of opioids and things like that, there's the possibility of being able to reduce polypharmacy. And for lots of patients with chronic pain, palliative care, things like this, we're talking about supporting their quality of life. If we just touch on the opioid crisis for a moment, so it's no surprise to you, this is something that's very big, not just in the US, where some of these numbers are coming from, but even within Australia. We're talking about, so I think these numbers were coming from 2014, but the idea of about 20,000 doses of opioid per million people each day in Australia. So it's not nothing, and it's certainly something that we can be looking for lots of ways to reduce it. So it's worth talking about just, well, why aren't we using illicit cannabis? Why aren't we just saying, okay, well, go for it, people, off you go? Well, in the first instance, they are. That definitely, and before 2016, but even now, when it's still not so simple a process for people to have access to medically prescribed cannabis. So they certainly are using it. The question is, what are they using it, or what are they getting when they're using it? So this particular graph came from what turned out to be, for the full set, was about 51 families who were using it for their children for refractory epilepsy. In this instance, what they really need is CBD. THC is actually not appropriate for epilepsy and seizure-related diagnoses. What we want to see here is CBD. And of course, the reality is, so CBD in this instance is the red or yellow bars. And even just from a glance, it's very difficult to see the red and the yellow bars. So this is what people are getting is kind of questionable with illicitly supplied cannabis. So there's many reasons why we want to be able to control the use of the availability of cannabis within Australia, but moreover, even just specifically for that patient, it's really appropriate that they are getting what they need, and only that. Yeah. So on this, it's probably also now worth talking about the risks and contraindications for CBD and THC. So this is a graph talking about the therapeutic ratio. So this is the usual effective dose. So how much do you need versus then how much is it actually going to kill you? So for things like our heroin, even codeine, methadone, like it's still a sizable component. Like there's not that much difference between what you need to get an appropriate therapeutic dose and then what's actually going to be really not appropriate for you to have. Whereas for cannabis, because there are no CB1 receptors in the respiratory centres of the brainstem, we've actually got no recorded causes, situations of cannabis-related death. But that's not to say that there hasn't been indirect deaths associated with that. People can do silly things on silly stuff. But it's more around this idea of we can't depress our respiratory centre with cannabis alone. There are side effects though, which if you look at the list, what we would term as a side effect from a medicinal point of view is actually not necessarily a problem when people are trying to take it recreationally. But what we're aiming for here is having a slow enough titration up for the patients such that they can find their therapeutic level before they're seeing their side effects occur. So on that, with dosing guidance, this is probably an endless discussion, so we're only just kind of going to touch on it here, is this idea of one, the kind of indications that are likely to respond to either CBD alone or THC incorporated medicines. And then on top of that is this concept of the titration. So we need to be able to, each person is going to respond differently, and so we need to be able to find where that person is getting a response and level off there. And or if they're not, say they start with their, say they've got musculoskeletal pain or widespread pain, they might start on their CBD, titrate it up, find that it's actually still not creating the change they would like, and so then you start titrating up the THC again slowly, so you can find the point, that difference between therapeutic and minimal side effects for them. So it's definitely a one at a time game there. So let's talk about just what's going on with regulations in Australia. So when you first speak to your patient, you've then got to, and you consider that yes, it's probably appropriate that medicinal cannabis may be suitable for them. You've then got to find the particular product you would like to use, speak to or find where you can access that, which pharmacist might access it. Then you've got to be able to apply for approval from not just our TGA within the Commonwealth Government, but also within, for some components, you'll need to also speak with your state governments. Then you need to go back, once approval has been received, you've got to go back and speak to your patient again, and then prescribe for them to be able to then be dispensed. So it's quite a process. The other component of that is then you've got to be able to, as part of your approval process, you've got to be able to monitor the results of your patient. So there's quite a lot of back and forthing. And while the governments are certainly working to make that as simple as possible, they are ensuring that it is safe for them is obviously safe for the population is a really important thing. So these safeguards are absolutely valid. It's just that they're tricky to manage. So what we're aiming to do with CANNect is to be able to support you in that regulatory process. So we will, and our systems are able to support you in the creation of those forms. You're then able to submit it to the organisations as required. We then support you with the product options, the titrations that are required. We've just recently launched our concierge component, which allows a pharmacist or a health professional to speak with your patients to be able to support them in that titration process. And then any patient monitoring, and maybe we'll speak to this on the next slide. One of the requirements with the government is that you're able to monitor the patient's results and adjust their medications as required. So within our CANNect platform, we have a range of questionnaires that you may be able to use to ensure whatever change is happening for your patient is able to be, for a start, relayed back to you, but also then you'll be able to use that to tweak what kind of medications they might need. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. I might take a moment now to have a look at the questions and see if there's any needed. But in general, feel free to contact us at any time, and we'd love to speak with you all more. So it looks like Alex has answered lots already. Alex, can you point me to the ones that need responding to still?
Sure. So we had one question about the content on slide 3. Well, two questions that were sort of similar. One was asking where they could find research and more information, and the other was where they can stay up to date with changing regulations. So
Yep, great. So at the moment we have a page on our website that we'll send to you after this with all the resources, and this is useful for not just for you as the medical practitioner, but also some of them are some more overarching, simpler videos that might be appropriate to your patients also. So you can find that on our website under resources. And I've already forgotten the second question. This was about the regulations.
Yes, it was about staying up to date with regulations.
Yep. So for us at the moment, while they are changing, they're changing at kind of different times. So certainly you're more than welcome to contact each state and TGA department yourself to be able to get on their list to be told if changes occur. But in general, for us, we are doing that, and so then every time there is a change, we will forward those changes through to all the people involved on our lists.
There was another question about the receptors and the CB1 receptor, and just asking for you to go back over the negative feedback loop and what relation that loop may have to prescribing.
Okay. So this is so if we go back through the science again, maybe I can go to one moment, please. Okay. So we have this idea that for every time there's an action potential, the neurotransmitter is going to cross that cleft. So the ones that have CB1 receptors, the CB1 receptor is going to be on the the presynaptic terminal. So it's only what's happening in the postsynaptic terminal is the creation of the endocannabinoids. But once they then travel backwards up, we now have the CB1, so those endocannabinoids will now attach to the CB1 receptors, and then they will be what effectively turns off the neurotransmitter that's what otherwise would be going through that loop. And then once that's occurred, then the enzymes associated with the endocannabinoid system would then dissolve the the endocannabinoids in the presynaptic terminal, ending the loop there. And the other question?
The other part
how
of
does
that
it relate
was
to how does it relate to
Yep.
dosing? Yeah. So I think what's probably not completely highlighted in this slide is the idea that, so right next to the number 3, we've got our 2AG and EAE. So there are endocannabinoids for all of us that are able to be made in general. What we're talking about now is the use of phytocannabinoids that will directly connect with our CB1 receptors and or our CB2 receptors. And so this is where the individual variations are occurring. It's going to depend on what's going on for that individual's endocannabinoid source or creative source as to how that will affect our systems. So the quick answer for that is we don't know. Directly, we don't know what's going on, which is probably highlighting to the need to monitor results, because each person is going to respond very differently. So we certainly know this is where it's playing. We just don't know the details of how that's then affecting both the person's endocannabinoid sources and then, of course, what's happening otherwise and afterwards. Probably what's also worth mentioning is this difference in half-life. So for our endocannabinoids, because the enzymes are right there, they'll get degraded and dissipate very quickly, whereas our THC and CBD will hang around for far longer. In fact, I'm probably going to say it incorrectly, but I think we're talking about a half-life of something like 30 hours for THC. It's a really slowly changing molecule in our body. So one, we're talking about how it's affecting dosing, but also then the other bit is then what's happening afterwards with the molecule. Yeah. Were there any more questions, Alex?
Yeah, so there was one on terpenoids and the effect they have. So I think that was talking about the entourage effect and asking if those entourage molecules just reinforce the outcome you were having, or if it always creates a positive impact on treatment.
So easy, we don't know. In fact, previously it's only very recent that they have discovered that the terpenoids will be even at all connected to the cannabinoid receptors. So previously they just thought something else was happening, that there was a more bigger picture positive result. So it's definitely an I don't know for the entourage effect. And again, because of, and probably no doubt because these terpenoids and the rest are present in other plant foods, it's probably really hard to tease out the end result, right? Short of starving someone and not giving them broccoli at the same time as their medicinal cannabis. So I think that's a tricky one to know at this early stage. Again, it's worth, for us, we would often recommend people just starting on one, either the full spectrum, which is the whole plant, or the isolate, so just the cannabinoid, seeing which one works for them, changing if it's right or wrong for them.
We had a few more questions. The next one we had was on contraindications for THC patients and sort of how often that occurs for patients on THC.
Yep. So the general ones for THC would be young. So if you're under 18 or 21, this is when we're talking about, one of the previous questions was around, the effect of, we kind of spoke about this effect of how is this exogenous source of cannabinoids affecting our endogenous source of cannabinoids. And so when you're talking about a growing brain, it's probably best not to play around with the creation of your endogenous system. I'm sure there will be exceptions to the rule there, but in general, we would talk about just not offering it for the under 18s unless it's a requirement. So refractory epilepsy, sure, let's play CBD then. but otherwise, try something else. The other component would be pregnancy, possibly even breastfeeding for THC. And then driving is another. So it is currently illegal to be driving with THC in your blood or saliva in Australia. So in Australia, we'll have, for, say, alcohol, we'll have a level that is deemed as safe and a level that's deemed unsafe above that. There is no such level for Australia for THC. So if it's detectable, then it's not defensible. So it is very much recommended if your patients are still driving and wish to still drive, then then we're very much wanting to talk about isolate CBD rather than THC. My head is saying that there is another one, but it's also saying I can't remember what it is.
Yep. And sorry, so there was one last question, and it was on the concierge that you mentioned right at the end, and what they do and what impact that has on treatment.
Yep. So the concierge is a new thing we've launched. We've just noticed that because the titration can be really different and tricky for each patient, and so while the doctor can say, okay, we want you to just slowly, ramp up, it's still a relatively difficult and scary thing for the patient to actually undergo this themselves. And so our concierge at the moment are pharmacists who are trained to deal with medicinal cannabis patients, and they will speak with the patient, on the 5th day and on the 12th day, and each week initially, just so they can find out what's going on for them, find out how they're responding, and support them in that titration process. The other components is being useful that we've noticed is being able to support them in working out the effects, not just the positive effects, but then the side effects, because we really want to be watching that they're not going so high, not titrating so high that they get side effects that they're not interested in having. So it kind of goes in both directions. You don't want them to titrate too slowly, but you also don't want them to titrate too quickly either. So the concierge is effectively a person at the other end of the phone, being able to support your patients through this process.
Great. Well, there's a couple others, and I'll respond to them in the chat, but I think we'll leave it there.
Lovely. Thanks, Alex. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate your time. Definitely call us and email us as you need. We'll respond. Thank you.
Definitely.
Have a good day.
Thank you.